My neighbor was the only person who believed in me. That sounds dramatic, I know. Like the kind of sentence people write after they've already figured their life out. But when all of this started, I was 24 years old, drowning in unpaid bills, surviving on instant noodles, and pretending that my dream of becoming an illustrator wasn't already dead. My name is Elijah. 3 years earlier, I'd graduated from college convinced that talent and hard work would eventually pay off. Everyone had said the same thing. Just keep drawing. Your style is unique. Studios love artists like you. Reality turned out to be different. I spent 2 years sending portfolios to every game company, animation studio, and publishing house I could find. Most never replied. Some sent automatic rejection emails. A few complimented my work before telling me they had chosen a candidate whose experience better matched their current needs. I stopped counting after rejection number 83. By the time this story begins, I was working nights stocking shelves at a grocery store and sleeping through most of the day. I hadn't opened my sketchbook in almost a month. It hurt too much. There was no point drawing things nobody wanted to see. My apartment wasn't really an apartment. It was a tiny studio with cracked windows, unreliable heating, and walls so thin I could hear my upstairs neighbor sneeze. The only reason I could afford it was because the building was old enough that even the landlord seemed embarrassed to collect rent. Across the hallway lived Aiden. I'd seen him around for almost a year. Tall, quiet, usually carrying a backpack full of books or groceries. He always smiled when we crossed paths. But neither of us had ever moved beyond the usual morning or have a good day. He looked about my age, maybe a little older. The strange thing about Aiden was that everyone in the building seemed to know him. Mrs. Hernandez from apartment 2B adored him because he fixed her microwave. The elderly couple downstairs invited him over every Sunday for dinner. Even our grumpy landlord softened whenever Aiden was around. Meanwhile, I was just the guy in apartment 4C who barely came outside. One rainy Tuesday morning, after another overnight shift, I climbed the stairs carrying 2 grocery bags. One of them split open halfway up. Cans rolled everywhere. A carton of eggs bounced down 3 steps before exploding dramatically against the wall. I closed my eyes. Perfect. I was too exhausted to even be embarrassed. Before I could kneel down, another pair of hands started picking up the cans. "You've got soup," someone said. "I'll rescue the pasta." I looked up. Aiden. He was wearing an old gray hoodie with paint stains on one sleeve and balancing 3 cans against his chest. "You don't have to." "I know." He smiled. "But it'll take 2 minutes." For some reason, that made it harder to argue. We collected everything in silence. Well, everything except the eggs. Those were beyond saving. "You lost good soldiers," Aiden said, looking at the mess. I laughed. Actually laughed. Surprised both of us. "I guess breakfast is canceled. You could always borrow mine." I blinked. "What?" "I bought too many yesterday." He shrugged like offering food to a near stranger was perfectly normal. "I can spare 6. "You really don't have to." "I know." There was that answer again. "I still want to." 5 minutes later, I found myself standing awkwardly inside his apartment while he packed half a carton of eggs into a paper bag. His place looked alive. Bookshelves, plants, sketches pinned to one wall, coffee brewing, music playing quietly from somewhere I couldn't see. Nothing expensive, just warm, comfortable. "You draw?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He looked toward the sketches. "Oh, just for fun." I stared at one charcoal portrait taped near the window. It was incredible. Not perfect. Better. It had personality. "I wish my just for fun looked like that." He turned toward me. "You draw too?" I hesitated. "Not really." His eyes drifted to my backpack. A corner of my sketchbook was sticking out. He noticed. I noticed him noticing. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then he smiled gently. "Not really. I used to." He nodded once. Didn't push. Didn't ask why. Somehow that made me want to explain anyway. "It didn't work out." "What didn't?" "The whole artist thing. You tried. For years. And I failed." He looked at me for several seconds, not pitying, just thinking. Then he said something nobody else had ever said. Those aren't the same sentence. I frowned. What? I tried and I failed. He leaned against the kitchen counter. They're different. I don't think employers agree. He laughed quietly. No, probably not. But they're still different. I didn't know how to answer that. Instead, I accepted the eggs. Thanks. Anytime. I walked back across the hall wondering why that conversation kept replaying in my head. Those aren't the same sentence. It was such a small thing. But somehow, it refused to leave. 3 nights later, I came home around 3 in the morning after another shift. The hallway lights were off. Only one apartment still had light under the door. Aiden's. As I unlocked mine, his door opened. Oh, he smiled sleepily. You're just getting home? Night shift. Rough. The usual. He looked at me for a second. You haven't been sleeping much. I blinked. How can you tell? You look tired. I laughed. That's because I am. He nodded toward my apartment. You still drawing? The question caught me completely off guard. No. Why not? I shrugged. Doesn't matter. It matters if you miss it. I forced a smile. Good night, Aiden. Night, Elijah. I closed my door, then leaned against it. Why did he care? We barely knew each other. Most people heard I wanted to be an illustrator and immediately started giving advice. Be realistic. Maybe keep it as a hobby. You're still young. You'll figure something else out. Aiden hadn't said any of that. Instead, he asked whether I missed drawing. The answer was obvious. Of course I did. I missed it every single day. I just missed believing it could become anything even more. The next afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I almost ignored it. Almost. When I opened it, Aiden stood there holding 2 mugs. I made too much coffee. I looked suspiciously at both identical mugs. You made exactly 2. He grinned. Maybe. I thought you'd caught up on sleep. I have. Then. He lifted 1 mug. 5 minutes. I don't usually. I know. There it was again. I still thought I'd ask. Against every instinct telling me to stay alone, I said yes. I had no idea that accepting 1 cup of coffee would change the direction of my entire life. The coffee was better than anything I could afford. Not because it was expensive. Because Aiden had actually taken the time to grind the beans instead of pouring hot water over instant powder like I did every morning. You look disappointed, he said. I've just realized I've been drinking flavored regret for the last 6 months. He laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. His apartment felt different in the afternoon. Sunlight poured through the windows, landing across stacks of books and half-finished sketches spread over the dining table. There were pencils everywhere, sticky notes, open notebooks, a laptop covered in tiny stickers from different art museums. It looked messy, the kind of messy that came from someone actually living instead of just existing. You really draw just for fun? I nodded toward the sketches again. He followed my gaze. Mostly. They're really good. Thanks. You could probably sell these. Maybe. He shrugged. But I don't really want to. That sentence completely confused me. You don't. No. I work as a librarian. I blinked. A librarian? MHM. I love books. I love drawing. I don't need one to become the other. That was not an answer I expected. For years I'd measured every drawing against one question. Could someone pay me for this? If the answer was no, then what was the point? Aiden seemed to live by completely different rules. You don't ever wonder what would have happened if you'd pursued it professionally? He smiled into his coffee. Sometimes. And I realized I'd probably stop enjoying it. I stared at him. You make it sound easy. It isn't. He leaned back in his chair. I just learned something before you did. What? If the thing you love only has value when someone else approves of it. He looked toward the sketches on the wall. Then eventually someone else's opinion becomes more important than your own. Silence settled between us. I hated how much sense that made. Over the next few weeks, coffee somehow became normal. sometimes at his apartment, sometimes on the fire escape outside our building when the weather was nice. We never planned it. One of us would knock, the other would answer. We'd talk about books, movies, terrible landlords, the old woman downstairs who somehow knew every piece of gossip before it happened. Everything except me. Whenever the conversation drifted toward my life, I'd redirect it somewhere else. Aiden noticed. He just never called me out on it. Until one Thursday evening. So, he looked up from the chessboard between us. You've been avoiding one topic for about 3 weeks. I have. MHM. What topic? He moved one of his knights. Your drawings. I sighed. I told you. No. You told me they didn't work out. That's different. I stared at the board. I don't really want to talk about it. I know. He made another move. You don't have to. But I think you want someone to ask. His words landed harder than they should have. Because they were true. I wanted someone to ask. I just didn't want to answer. You know what rejection feels like? I asked quietly. He nodded. Sure. 83 rejection emails. His eyebrows lifted. You counted. I stopped after 83. Silence. I wasn't good enough. Aiden looked at me for a long moment. Then, can I ask something? I guess. Did any of them say that? What? You're not good enough. No. What did they say? I laughed bitterly. The usual. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. Your work is impressive but not the right fit. He nodded slowly. So, he pointed at me with one chess piece. You translated all of that into, I'm not good enough. That's what it means. No, it means they hired someone else. Same difference. It isn't. I rubbed my forehead. You always do this. Do what? Argue with every negative thing I say. He smiled. No, I argue with the parts that aren't true. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. Around 1 in the morning I pulled my old sketchbook out of the closet. Dust covered the cover. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Maybe months. I flipped through page after page. Character designs. City streets. Portraits. Fantasy creatures. Ideas I'd abandoned halfway through because they weren't perfect. I reached the last blank page. Picked up a pencil. Then froze. What was the point? Nobody would ever see it. Nobody wanted it. My phone buzzed. A message. Aiden. Still awake? I stared at it. Then replied. Yeah. A few seconds later. Come outside. Confused, I opened my apartment door. He was already sitting on the hallway floor outside his apartment with 2 mugs. Couldn't sleep either? I sat beside him. No. For a minute neither of us spoke. The building was quiet. Someone's television murmured faintly downstairs. Rain tapped softly against the hallway window. Finally Aiden glanced at me. You almost drew tonight. My head turned. How did you know? You've got graphite on your hand. I looked down. He was right. I laughed quietly. I didn't even notice. You picked up the pencil. For about 10 seconds. What stopped you? I answered before thinking. Nobody cares. The words echoed down the hallway. Aiden stayed silent. Then asked very softly, Do you? I frowned. What? Do you care? About drawing. Of course. Then why does nobody else's opinion get the final vote? I looked away. Because I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did. I just hated it. I think. I spoke so quietly I barely heard myself. I'm scared that if I try again. I swallowed. And fail again. Then that's it. The dream's really over. Aiden nodded. I figured. You did. You don't sound like someone who stopped believing. He smiled gently. You sound like someone who's terrified of hoping again. I stared at the floor. Nobody had ever described me that accurately. Not my parents. Not my professors. Not my friends from college. Just my neighbor. The guy I'd barely spoken to a month ago. You know something? He said. What? I think you're still an artist. I laughed. No. You haven't drawn in months. So, you still see the world like one. I frowned. What does that even mean? He pointed toward the hallway window. What color is the rain? I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. It's. I turned toward the glass. Streetlights reflected through the water. Orange, blue, gold. The pavement shimmered beneath passing headlights. It's not really one color. He smiled. Exactly. I looked back at him. Most people would have just said gray. He stood up, picked up both mugs, and headed toward his apartment. Halfway to the door he stopped. Without turning around he said, "Draw one page tomorrow. That's all. Don't send it anywhere. Don't post it. Don't show me. Just prove to yourself that you still can." Then he disappeared inside. I sat alone in the hallway for another 10 minutes, thinking about one sentence. Draw one page tomorrow. For the first time in months, it didn't sound impossible. The next morning I woke up at noon. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. Draw one page. That was it. One page. Not a portfolio. Not a masterpiece. Not something worthy of an art director's approval. Just one page. It sounded almost insultingly simple, which made it strangely difficult. I made coffee, cleaned my tiny kitchen, folded laundry I'd been ignoring for days, checked my email, scrolled through social media, anything except opening the sketchbook. By 3 in the afternoon, I finally admitted what I was doing. I wasn't busy. I was avoiding it. Again, I pulled the sketchbook onto the table, opened to the blank page, held the pencil. Nothing. Every idea felt stupid. Every line looked wrong before I even drew it. My hand refused to move. Then I remembered something Aiden had said. Don't show me. That part mattered. Nobody would judge this page. Not recruiters. Not strangers online. Not even him. Just me. So instead of trying to create something impressive, I drew my coffee mug. Crooked. Uneven. The handle looked weird. The perspective was terrible. Halfway through, I almost erased everything. Instead, I kept going. 20 minutes later, the page was finished. It wasn't good, but it existed. For the first time in months, I had drawn something. That evening someone knocked. I already knew who it was. Come in. Aiden leaned against the doorway. How'd it go? I drew. His smile appeared immediately. You did. Don't get excited. It wasn't great. I wasn't there. You don't know. I know you drew. He looked almost proud, which felt ridiculous. I'd completed the artistic equivalent of walking around the block. Still, something inside me felt lighter. I wanted to throw it away. I figured. I almost did. But you didn't. No. He nodded once. Good. That was it. No request to see it. No critique. No advice. Just good. Over the next week, one page became 2. Then 3. Some were terrible. Some surprised me. Most stayed inside the sketchbook. Exactly where Aiden said they should. One afternoon, he found me sitting on the fire escape, drawing the rooftops across the street. He didn't interrupt. He simply sat beside me with 2 iced coffees. We stayed there nearly an hour, neither of us speaking much. It was comfortable, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Eventually, he nodded toward the page. You've changed something. I have. You stopped erasing every line. I looked down. He was right. There were construction marks everywhere. Messy circles. Loose strokes. Normally, I erased all of them. I didn't even notice. You trust yourself a little more. The sentence settled quietly between us. I wanted to argue. Instead, I realized he was right. Just a little. About 2 weeks later, I got another rejection email. Number 84. This time from a small indie game studio I'd secretly been excited about. I stared at the screen for several minutes. The familiar feeling returned immediately. There it is. Proof. You're wasting your time. You never should have started drawing again. Without thinking, I closed the sketchbook, shoved it under the bed, pulled on my jacket. I needed air. The hallway door opened at exactly the same moment. Aiden stepped outside carrying groceries. He took one look at me. What happened? Nothing. He raised an eyebrow. It was another rejection. I hadn't told him. He guessed anyway. How? You've got the same expression you had the day we met. I laughed without humor. I guess that's becoming my face. He unlocked his apartment. You want to help me carry these inside? I don't really feel like talking. I know. I'm not trying to. Confused, I followed him anyway. Inside, he unpacked vegetables while I stood awkwardly near the kitchen. For nearly 5 minutes, he said absolutely nothing. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. You're really not going to ask? You said you didn't want to talk. So we don't have to. I watched him organize groceries, completely unbothered by the silence. It hit me then. Most people couldn't tolerate silence. They rushed to fix it, to encourage, to explain, to solve. Aiden just stayed. When I finally spoke, it was because I wanted to. They rejected me. I know. It was a studio I actually had a chance with. He nodded. I'm sorry. I keep thinking. I sat down at his kitchen table. Maybe everyone else was right. I should have given this up years ago. Aiden finished putting away the last bag, then sat across from me. Can I tell you something? Sure. I've been waiting for this rejection. I stared at him. What? I knew it would come. You knew I'd fail? No. I knew someone would say no. He folded his hands together. The important part isn't that someone rejected you. It's what you do tomorrow. I'll probably stop drawing again. Will you? I don't know. He smiled. I think you do. I looked away, because the truth was, I'd already been thinking about the page I wanted to draw next. Even while reading the rejection email, even while convincing myself to quit, some stubborn part of me hadn't stopped. Aiden noticed the tiny smile that escaped before I could hide it. There you are. What? The guy who still wants to draw. I laughed despite myself. You're unbelievably annoying. I've been told. No. I shook my head. You're unbelievably patient. He smiled. I had good teachers. Who? My parents. They believed effort matters. More than results. I looked around his apartment. The sketches, the books, the quiet confidence that seemed to exist in everything he did. You're lucky. I know. He became thoughtful. Not everyone grows up hearing someone say they believe in them. The room fell quiet, because he was right. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said those words to me. Not honestly. Not without adding conditions. Maybe that's why his faith in me felt so strange. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. He simply expected me to keep going. As if failure wasn't the end of the story. As if it was only one chapter. And somehow, I was starting to believe him. For the first time in a long time, my apartment stopped feeling like a place where dreams came to die. It was still tiny. The heating still rattled every night. The kitchen sink still leaked whenever I washed dishes. None of that had changed. Instead of collapsing into bed after work, I'd spend 20 or 30 minutes drawing before sleeping. Sometimes longer. Not because I forced myself. Because I wanted to. The strange part was that the less I worried about making professional art, the better my drawings became. I stopped trying to impress imaginary recruiters. I started noticing ordinary things again. The old man feeding pigeons every morning. The bakery across the street before sunrise. Rain collecting on bicycle seats. People reading alone on buses. Life. Real life. One evening I was sketching from the fire escape when Aiden came outside carrying a small paper bag. I brought supplies. I looked inside. 2 cinnamon rolls. You're trying to bribe me. I prefer the word motivate. You know artists work for exposure. He groaned dramatically. Please don't ever say that again. I laughed. I've been waiting to use that joke. It was terrible. I know. He sat beside me. For a while we ate in silence, watching people hurry home below us. You've been smiling more, he said. Have I? MHM. I think your face finally remembered how. I looked down at my sketchbook. I still don't know if any of this matters. Aiden was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you know why I like libraries?" "I assume because you're a librarian." He smiled. "That's the obvious answer. So what's the real one?" "I like watching people find the book they didn't know they needed." I frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." He nodded toward my sketchbook. "You think success is getting hired. I think success is remembering why you started." A few days later, something happened that completely caught me off guard. I came home after work and found a package leaning against my apartment door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a brand new sketchbook. Heavy paper, professional quality, far nicer than anything I had ever bought for myself. There was no note, only one small receipt from the local art store. I crossed the hallway immediately. Aiden opened the door before I knocked twice. "You." He tried to look innocent. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I held up the sketchbook. "You forgot the receipt." He looked down. "I did. You bought this." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe." "Aiden, I saw you comparing prices online. I know you wouldn't spend that much on yourself. You shouldn't have." "I wanted to. I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to." I sighed. "You really need to stop doing things like this." "Why?" "Because." I struggled to find the words. "People don't." He looked at me carefully. "People don't what?" "They don't believe in someone this much." His expression softened. "They should." The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. "I haven't earned it." "You don't earn belief." He said it so simply. "So what do you base it on?" "You." I laughed softly. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He leaned against the doorway. "I know you work nights and still come home wanting to create. I know rejection didn't make you bitter. It made you scared. There's a difference." He smiled. "And I know every time you think about quitting, you draw anyway." I looked down at the sketchbook in my hands. Nobody had ever described me as someone who kept going. I'd always seen myself as someone who kept failing. Maybe those weren't the same thing. A week later, Aiden knocked on my door just after lunch. "You busy?" "Not really." "Come with me." "Where?" "You'll see." "I'm not sure I know." He grinned. "But trust me." That should have worried me. Instead, I grabbed my jacket. 20 minutes later, we stood outside a small community arts center. I stopped walking. "No." Aiden kept going. "No, no. I'm not going in there." "Why?" "Because that's an art exhibition." "It is." "I'm not an artist." He looked at me like I'd said something ridiculous. "You filled almost 2 sketchbooks in the last month. That's called drawing. It's called being an artist." "No. It's called having a hobby." He smiled patiently. "You know." "What?" "You spend a lot of energy inventing reasons why you don't count." I folded my arms. "I'm serious." "So am I." He opened the front door. "Nobody inside knows your name. Nobody expects anything from you. Just look." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to leave, to go home, to avoid another reminder that everyone else was better than me. Aiden didn't pull me inside. He simply waited. After nearly a minute, I walked through the door. The exhibition wasn't what I expected. It wasn't full of famous artists or impossible masterpieces. It was local work. Watercolors, photography, ceramics, sketches. Some were incredible. Some were clearly made by beginners. All of them were hanging on the walls with equal care. People wandered quietly between them, smiling, talking, enjoying themselves. There. I looked around. Just people. Aiden smiled. "Exactly." For the next hour, we walked through every room. He never compared my work to theirs, never pointed out what I should learn. He simply let me look. As we were leaving, an older woman carrying a clipboard stopped us. "Did you enjoy the exhibition?" Aiden nodded. "Very much." She turned to me. "Are you an artist too?" The question hit me like a train. My mouth opened, Closed. For years, the answer had been automatic. No. But before I could say it, Aiden looked at me, not expectantly, not encouragingly, just calmly, like he already knew the answer. I took a slow breath. Then, for the first time in years, I heard myself say, "I'm trying to be." The woman smiled warmly. "That's how all of us start." She walked away. Neither of us spoke until we were back outside. Finally, Aiden looked over. "How'd that feel?" I stared at the sidewalk. "Terrifying." And a small smile appeared before I could stop it. "A little true." Aiden didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to, because for the first time since we'd met, I had started believing something about myself before he had to say it aloud. And somehow that felt like the biggest step yet. On the way home, neither of us talked much. Not because there was nothing to say, because I couldn't stop replaying those 4 words. "I'm trying to be." It was such a small sentence, but somehow it felt bigger than every rejection email I'd ever received. "You've been quiet," Aiden said as we climbed the stairs. "I'm thinking." "Dangerous." I smiled. "Probably." When we reached our floor, I unlocked my apartment. Before stepping inside, I looked back at him. "Thanks." He tilted his head. "For what?" "For making me go." "I didn't make you." "You practically did." He laughed. "I opened a door. You walked through it." A few days later, I had the evening off. That almost never happened. Normally, I'd spend it catching up on sleep before another overnight shift. But for some reason, I couldn't settle down. Around 7, there was another knock. Aiden stood outside with a folded flyer in his hand. "I found something." "What is it?" He handed it over. A local publishing company was hosting an illustration contest. First prize wasn't huge. A freelance contract. A small cash award. Your work displayed during the city's arts festival. Nothing life-changing. Still, it was real. I immediately handed the flyer back. "No, you didn't even read the rules." "I don't need to. I'm not entering." Aiden didn't take the flyer. Instead, he folded my fingers back around it. "Why?" "Because I'll lose." "You might." "There. That's exactly why." He sighed. "No, it isn't." "It absolutely is." We stood in the hallway for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "Do you remember what you told me after your first page?" I frowned. "No. You said it wasn't very good." "I remember." "Were you glad you drew it anyway?" "Yeah." "Why?" I thought about it. "Because it reminded me I still could." He smiled. "So maybe entering this contest isn't about winning. It's about reminding yourself you still can." I looked down at the flyer again. Deadline: 3 weeks. 1 original illustration. That's all. 3 weeks. Felt impossible. It also felt possible, which scared me even more. For the next several days, my apartment became a disaster. Reference photos covered the walls. Pencils rolled across every surface. Crumbled sheets of paper filled the trash can. I started over 6 times. Nothing looked right. Every sketch seemed worse than the last. One evening, Aiden knocked gently. "You alive?" "Barely." He stepped inside for the first time. I'd never invited him before. He looked around at the chaos. "This is impressive." "It's a disaster." "It's a working disaster." "There's a difference." I dropped into my chair. "I hate everything." "You usually do around version 6. I looked up. "What?" "I've noticed a pattern. You hate every drawing right before it starts getting good." I blinked. "You've noticed that?" "I notice a lot." He wandered slowly around the room, careful not to look directly at the drawing on my desk. True to his word, he had never asked to see my work unless I offered. Instead, his attention settled on the overflowing trash bin. "You've thrown away a forest." "It deserved it." "Did it?" I shrugged. "They weren't good enough." Aiden reached into the bin. Before I could stop him, he'd unfolded one of the discarded sketches. "Hey, I thought you didn't want to see them." "I don't." He held the page upside down. "I'm not." "You are." "I'm looking at the back." I couldn't help laughing. You're impossible. I've accepted that. He placed the page back exactly where he'd found it, then looked at me. When was the last time you took a break? I don't have time. You've been sitting here for 6 hours. I know. Come eat dinner. I'm not hungry. He raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a question. We ate pasta in his apartment while rain tapped against the windows. For the first 15 minutes, I complained. About proportions, lighting, composition, perspective, everything wrong with the illustration. Aiden listened without interrupting. Finally, he asked, "Can I ask one thing?" "Sure. Do you know what's missing?" "I've got a list." "I think you're missing something else." "What?" He smiled. "Fun." I stared at him. "Fun? You started this because you loved drawing. When did it become an exam?" I looked down at my plate. Somewhere along the way, it had. Every line felt like it had to prove I deserved another chance. Every mistake became evidence that I never should have tried again. I turned the contest into another judgment, instead of another opportunity. Aiden seemed to read the realization on my face. "There you are." "What?" "The reason I wanted you to enter. So you'd lose. So you'd remember there's a difference between creating." He pointed toward my apartment across the hall. "And performing." The next morning I did something strange. I threw away the illustration. Not because it was bad, because it wasn't honest. I'd spent 6 days trying to create something I thought judges would like. I hadn't drawn a single thing I actually wanted to draw. So I started over. Again. This time, I drew the view from our fire escape. The old brick buildings. Laundry fluttering between windows. The bakery on the corner. Morning light spilling across rooftops. And sitting on the rusted railing with a cup of coffee. A single figure in a gray hoodie. Not detailed enough to recognize. Just someone quietly watching the city wake up. I didn't realize I was smiling until I was halfway through. For the first time since the contest began, drawing didn't feel like work. It felt like coming home. Late that evening, I knocked on Aiden's door. He opened it with a book still in his hand. "Everything okay?" Without saying a word, I held up the finished illustration. His eyes widened slightly. "You want me to see it?" I nodded. For a long moment, he simply looked. He didn't rush. He didn't search for flaws. When he finally looked back at me, there was something quietly emotional in his expression. "You drew this because you loved it." It wasn't a question. I smiled. "Yeah." He looked at the drawing one more time, then back at me. "I knew you'd find your way back." I swallowed. "How?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because even when you stopped believing in yourself." He smiled gently. I never did. For a second, neither of us moved. Something had shifted between us. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It wasn't just friendship. I couldn't name it yet. But when he handed the illustration back, our fingers brushed for the briefest moment. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Neither of us said anything. Some silences ask questions that words aren't ready to answer. For the next 2 days, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Not the drawing. Not the contest. Our hands. It had barely lasted a second. An accident, really. Still, every time I replayed it in my head, I remembered that neither of us had rushed to move away, which was probably meaningless, right? I told myself that at least 20 times. I didn't believe it once. The contest deadline arrived on a rainy Friday. I stood outside the publishing company's office holding a large portfolio case. My stomach was somewhere near my shoes. "I can't do this." Aiden looked completely unsurprised. "I know. I'm serious. I know. What if it's terrible? Then they'll see it. What if they hate it? They might. What if?" He smiled. "You've already won." I stared at him. "I haven't even gone inside. You drew something you love. You finished it. You entered. 3 months ago, you couldn't even open your sketchbook." He nodded toward the building. "This part is just paperwork." I laughed nervously. "You're impossible." "I've heard. You keep saying that. Because people keep proving it." I looked at the glass doors. My reflection stared back. The same face, the same jacket, the same person, except, not quite. 3 months ago, I would have turned around and gone home. Today, I took a deep breath. I'll be right back. You will. Submitting the illustration took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I'd spent weeks building it into this impossible mountain inside my head. Instead, a woman behind a reception desk smiled politely, accepted the portfolio, gave me a receipt, and wished me good luck. That was it. No dramatic judging. No immediate rejection. Just done. When I stepped back outside, Aiden was sitting on a bench with 2 coffees. How long have you been sitting there? About 4 minutes. You already bought coffee? I was confident. I accepted 1 cup. It's officially out of my hands now. He nodded. Best place for it. Waiting turned out to be harder than drawing. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. I tried distracting myself by sketching every day. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes I'd check my email 15 times before lunch. One afternoon, while we were walking home from the grocery store, I finally admitted it. I think I've made a mistake. What mistake? I've started hoping. Aiden looked over. I was wondering when that would happen. It hurts. I know. It would have been easier if I didn't care. He adjusted one of the grocery bags. It would have been quieter, but not better. 3 days later, I came home after another overnight shift. My phone buzzed before I even reached my apartment. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored those. For some reason, I answered. Hello. Is this Elijah Brooks? My heartbeat immediately sped up. Yes. This is Marianne from Alder House Publishing. Every muscle in my body locked. We received your contest submission. I closed my eyes. Here it comes. Another polite rejection. We'd like to invite you for an interview. I frowned. An interview? Your illustration wasn't selected as the grand prize winner. My heart dropped. Of course. But, she continued before I could respond. Our creative director would like to discuss freelance opportunities with you. I forgot how to breathe. What? We were impressed with your storytelling. We're expanding one of our illustrated book lines. If you're interested, we'd love to meet. I leaned against the hallway wall. Words completely abandoned me. Yes. We'll send you the details by email. The call ended. I just stood there, still holding my keys, not moving. The hallway door opened. Aiden stepped outside carrying a stack of library books. One look at my face. What happened? I couldn't answer. Instead, I handed him my phone. He read the email that had just arrived. Once, then again, very slowly. When he looked up, he was smiling wider than I'd ever seen before. You did it. I laughed through a shaky breath. I didn't win. No. He shook his head. You got something better. I don't understand. They saw you. He handed the phone back. They saw exactly what I saw. For some reason, that sentence hit harder than the email. They saw you. Not, they liked your drawing. Not, you got lucky. Just, they saw you. Before I realized what I was doing, I stepped forward and hugged him. It lasted only a couple of seconds. When I pulled back, I immediately felt embarrassed. Sorry. You don't have to apologize. He smiled warmly. I've been waiting a long time to see that smile. I blinked. What? The real one. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday. I spent the entire week convinced they would change their minds. They're going to realize they made a mistake. Aiden looked up from the novel he was reading. Probably not. They'll meet me and regret calling. Unlikely. I have no professional experience. You have drawings. They'll find someone better. He closed his book. Elijah. What? Do you know what your biggest problem is? I can think of several. You think everyone else is making decisions based on the same voice that's been criticizing you. I frowned. What does that mean? You assume they'll see you the way you used to see yourself. He smiled gently. But they don't live inside your head. That sentence followed me all the way to the interview. And strangely, it helped. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. We talked about illustration, children's books, visual storytelling, my influences. The creative director asked more questions about why I'd chosen that particular cityscape than about my resume. When I admitted it was the view from my apartment building, she smiled. It feels lived in. That's why we liked it. Not polished, not perfect, lived in. When I walked back outside, I felt hopeful. Not because I knew I'd gotten the job, because for the first time, someone had wanted to hear me talk about my work. Not defend it, not justify it, just talk about it. As I rounded the corner toward my apartment building, I spotted Aiden sitting on the front steps. He looked up immediately. Well, I smiled. It went well. I knew it would. I sat beside him. You know. I looked at him carefully. I've been thinking about something. That sounds serious. It is. If we'd never met. I looked down at my hands. I don't think I would have entered. I don't think I would have started drawing again. I don't think I would have answered that phone. He stayed quiet. So, I met his eyes. Thank you. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said very softly, I didn't give you your talent. I just reminded you it was still there. Our eyes stayed on each other a little longer than either of us seemed to notice. And for the first time, I found myself wondering whether the person who believed in me most might also be becoming the person I cared about most. For the next few days, I caught myself looking across the hallway more often than I meant to. Not because I needed anything. Not because I had another question about drawing. Just because I wanted to see him. That realization should have been obvious. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost by accident. I was making coffee one morning when I heard Aiden laugh through the open hallway window. Not loudly, just one short laugh at something Mrs. Hernandez had said downstairs. Without thinking, I smiled, then stopped. Why had that made my morning better? I stood there, coffee forgotten in my hand. Oh, that was new. The publishing house called the following Tuesday. I almost didn't answer. Old habits. Hello. Hi, Elijah. This is Marianne again. My pulse immediately sped up. We'd like to offer you the freelance position. Everything went completely silent. Not around me, inside me. Really? We loved your interview. And we'd like to start with a short-term project. I closed my eyes. My voice caught. I'd love to. After the call ended, I simply stood in my kitchen, smiling, then laughing, then somehow crying. Not because of the job, because someone had finally said yes. After years of hearing no, I didn't even think. I ran into the hallway. Aiden was just unlocking his apartment. He looked up in surprise. Elijah, I got it. His eyes widened. I got the job. For half a second, he just stared at me. Then the biggest smile spread across his face. I knew it. You actually knew. I hoped. No. I laughed. You knew. He shook his head. I believed. Those two words hit me harder than the job offer itself. Without thinking, I hugged him again. This time, neither of us apologized. When we stepped apart, we were both smiling. I have something for you, he said. What? Come inside. His apartment smelled like fresh bread. I baked. You bake too. I have hobbies. I've noticed. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying a small box. What is this? Open it. Inside was a fountain pen. Old. Restored. Beautiful. It belonged to my grandfather. I immediately closed the box. No. He frowned. What? I can't take this. You can. It's too important. Exactly. I looked at him in disbelief. Aiden. My grandfather wrote every day. He used to tell me something. He smiled softly. The right tool belongs in the hands of someone who'll actually use it. He nodded toward the box. I think he'd like you. My throat tightened. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I do. I looked down at the pen again. No one's ever. I stopped. No one's ever believed in me like this. He answered so quietly I almost missed it. I know. Work started the following Monday. It wasn't glamorous. I illustrated small scenes for children's books, parks, animals, neighborhoods, simple stories. But every time I opened the company email with my name on it, felt unreal. One evening I knocked on Aiden's door holding the first printed proof they'd sent me. I brought something. He opened the folder carefully. His eyes moved across the pages. Slowly. When he reached the final illustration, he looked back at me. You did it. I'm still doing it. Even better. He handed the pages back, then smiled. I'm proud of you. For words. Simple. Ordinary. Except, nobody outside my professors had ever said them to me. And somehow, hearing them from Aiden mattered more than I expected. Maybe because I believed he meant them. That night neither of us seemed ready to end the conversation. We wandered onto the fire escape with 2 mugs of tea. The city stretched below us, glowing under hundreds of apartment windows. I've been wondering something, I admitted. What? Why me? He looked confused. What do you mean? When we first met, you barely knew me. You bought me coffee. You encouraged me. You never gave up. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I wondered if I'd asked something too personal. Finally he spoke. My older brother. I looked at him. You have a brother? I had one. The past tense landed heavily. He wanted to write novels. He was incredible. What happened? He stopped. Aiden stared out across the rooftops. People convinced him that talent wasn't enough. So he quit. He never wrote another page. I stayed completely still. He died 3 years later. The words settled between us. Quiet. Heavy. I'm sorry. He nodded once. So? He smiled sadly. When I met someone who looked at a sketchbook the same way he used to, he glanced at me. I promised myself I wouldn't stay silent. Everything suddenly made sense. Not all of it, but enough. You weren't trying to save me. He smiled faintly. No. I was trying not to lose another artist. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The city carried on beneath us. Cars, sirens, distant conversations. Life continuing as always. Finally I said, You know. What? I don't think you're just my neighbor anymore. His eyes met mine. No. I shook my head. No. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Neither of us moved. The distance between us suddenly felt much smaller than the few inches that remained. And for the first time, I had the feeling that the next chapter of our story wasn't going to be about believing in my dreams. It was going to be about finally understanding what had quietly been growing between us all along. The publishing house offered me a full-time position 3 months later. Not freelance. Not temporary. A real contract. Health insurance. A desk with my name on it. A team that actually wanted my ideas. I stared at the email for nearly 10 minutes before it felt real. 3 months earlier, I couldn't convince myself to draw 1 page. Now someone wanted to pay me to do what I dreamed about for years. The first person I wanted to tell wasn't my parents. It wasn't an old college friend. It wasn't anyone from work. It was Aiden. He opened his apartment door before I even knocked. One look at my face and he smiled. Something happened. I couldn't stop grinning. They offered me a full-time position. For a second, he just looked at me. Then his smile slowly grew into the biggest one I'd ever seen. I knew they would. I laughed. No, you didn't. No. He admitted it easily. But I knew someone would. He stepped aside. Come in. We celebrated with homemade pizza. It wasn't fancy. Neither of us cared. Halfway through dinner, I looked around his apartment. Felt different now. Or maybe I did. The same books. The same plants. The same sketches on the wall. The same kitchen where he'd handed me 6 eggs the first week we'd met. I've been thinking, I said quietly. Dangerous, Aiden replied with a smile. I know. I looked at him for a long moment. When I met you, I thought my dream was ending. He stayed silent. I honestly believed I had failed. You never argued that I was talented. You never promised I'd succeed. You never told me everything would work out. He nodded. Because I couldn't promise any of those things. No, I smiled. You promised something better. He tilted his head. What? You treated me like someone worth believing in. Before I could believe it myself. The room became very quiet. He looked down at his mug for a moment before speaking. My brother used to say something. I remembered. The writer. The one who never finished his novel. He said. Aiden smiled softly. Sometimes people don't need someone to pull them forward. They just need someone who refuses to let them walk backward. I felt my throat tighten. You did that for me. No. He looked directly at me. You did the hard part. I just kept reminding you who you already were. We cleaned the kitchen together. Neither of us hurried. Neither of us seemed eager for the evening to end. When everything was finished, we wandered onto the fire escape one last time. It had become our place without either of us deciding it. The city stretched below us exactly as it had the day I'd drawn it for the contest. Only now, everything felt different. I've got something for you. Aiden disappeared inside for a moment. When he came back, he handed me a small envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. The first sketch I'd ever made after picking up my pencil again. The crooked coffee mug. I'd forgotten about it. I thought you never saw this. I didn't. He smiled. You left it on your table months ago while making coffee. I noticed you were about to throw it away. So. He looked slightly embarrassed. I took it. You stole my drawing? I rescued your drawing. I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. You are unbelievable. I've heard that before. I looked at the sketch again. The lines were shaky. The proportions were wrong. It wasn't good. But suddenly, I loved it. It reminds me where I started, I said quietly. It reminds me, Aiden answered. How far you've come. I carefully folded it again. I think I'll keep this forever. I hoped you would. The sun had almost disappeared behind the buildings. Orange light covered the rooftops. For a while we simply stood there, comfortably, peacefully. Finally I turned toward him. You know. What? The title of my first illustrated book is going to be dedicated to someone. He smiled. Your parents. I shook my head. No. My college professor? No. He looked curious. Then who? I smiled. The only person who believed in me before I gave anyone else a reason to. For the first time since we'd met. Aiden didn't know what to say. His eyes glistened slightly as he looked away toward the city. I don't think I deserved that. You do. No. He smiled quietly. I just knocked on your door. I laughed. And I answered. He looked back at me. I guess we both did. People sometimes ask me how I became an illustrator. They expect a story about talent, hard work, luck, the perfect opportunity. They're all part of the answer, but none of them are the reason I made it. The truth is much simpler. There was a time when I stopped believing in myself. And one person refused to stop believing in me. Not because he knew I'd succeed. Not because he could see the future. But because he saw something in me that I was too afraid to see myself. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person. One conversation. One knock on the door. Looking back now, I still think about the first thing Aiden ever said that stayed with me. Those aren't the same sentence. Back then, I thought trying and failing meant the same thing. Now I know they don't. Trying gave me another chance. Believing kept me moving. And meeting Aiden changed my life in more ways than I could have imagined. I found the career I dreamed about. I found myself again. And somewhere between shared cups of coffee, quiet evenings on a fire escape, and countless conversations about art and hope, I found the person I wanted to build the rest of my life with. Because in the end, my neighbor wasn't just the only person who believed in me. He became the reason I learned to believe in myself.